Okay, so despite the fact that the progressive conservative share of the vote dropped by 7%, they still, with about 43% of the popular vote, were far or well ahead of the Liberals, who rose marginally to 32%, and the New Democrats, who rose to about 20% of the vote, uh, since the progressive conservatives, aided by partly by the division of the opposition votes and partly by the first past the post electoral system, and of course money, generous funding, received 169 members out of 295, although one member, John Dahmer, if I remember correctly, died. And then in early 1989, Deborah Gray became the first elected Reform Party member of the House of Commons. The Liberals doubled their seats to 83, and also the New Democrats made gains, rising to 43 seats. Around 1989-1990, the Canadian economy started to slow down and then entered a recession. The deficit grew. The budget deficit became clearly higher than $30 billion, and we have to remember of that times dollars. We would have to multiply that by a factor of something. It could easily amount to something like $45 to $50 billion now, or at least $40 to $45 billion. In the fiscal year of 1991 to 1992, or 1992 to 1993, it was almost $39 billion, according to a document prepared by the Fraser Institute. And finally, it seems that some of you have to study a lot, invest a lot more time. And then because the Meech Lake Constitutional Accord, which was supposed to bring Quebec into the signatory provinces of the 1982 Canadian Constitution, failed in June 1990, not having been approved by the provincial cabinets and legislatures of Manitoba and Newfoundland. Then about 10 progressive conservative members of the House of Commons from Quebec, led by former cabinet minister Lucien Bouchard, broke away from the party and founded the Bloc Québécois group. The Western Canada-based populist and right-wing Reform Party started to erode the progressive conservative power base in Western Canada, especially in Alberta. The Liberals, under their new leader Jean Chrétien, began their resurgence, although briefly the New Democrats seemed to be on a roll, buoyed by election victories in Ontario in 1990, and then in British Columbia and in Saskatchewan in 1991. Mulroney then unsuccessfully tried to bring Quebec to approve the Constitution through the Charlottetown Accord, but that was rejected in a non-binding referendum in most of the Canadian provinces in late October 1992. He finally announced his resignation and retirement as Prime Minister and the Progressive Conservative leader in late February 1993, and the ensuing leadership election in June 1993 was won by Defense Minister Kim Campbell, and then in late June 1993, Mulroney left office and effectively active frontline politics. In retirement, there has been some controversy, especially because of the Schreiber affair, Airbus Schreiber affair, because in September 1995, the Canadian Department of Justice, acting on behalf of the RCMP, sent a letter of request to the Swiss government asking for information related to allegations that Mulroney was involved in a criminal conspiracy to defraud the government, the federal government of Canada. The investigation concerned improper commissions, in quotation marks, allegedly paid to German-Canadian businessman Mr. Karl-Heinz Schreiber, or to companies that he controlled, Brian Mulroney, and then former Newfoundland Premier Frank Moores, in exchange for 3 government contracts. They involved the purchase of Airbus Industrie aircraft by Air Canada, the purchase of helicopters by the Canadian Coast Guard from Messerschmitt Volkov Blom GmbH or MBB in 1986, and the establishment of a manufacturing plant for Thyssen light armored vehicles Bearhead project in the province of Nova Scotia, a project which Mulrooney as Prime Minister had cancelled. Mulrooney launched a $50 million Canadian libel lawsuit against the Government of Canada and the RCMP already in November 1995. And then in January 1997, he agreed to an out-of-court settlement with the federal government of Canada and the RCMP. Since leaving office in 1993, he has served as an international business consultant and remains a partner with the law firm Norton Rose. Currently, he sits on the board of directors of multiple corporations, including Barrick Gold, Quebecor Incorporated, Archer Daniels Midland, Trizec Han Corporation, Sendent Corporation, AOL Latin America Incorporated, and Cognicase Incorporated. He's also chairman of various international advisory boards and councils for many international companies. In 1998, he was made a Companion of the Order of Canada. In 2003, he received the Woodrow Wilson Award for Public Service from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars of the Smithsonian Institution at a ceremony in Montreal. The award was in recognition of his career in politics. In January 2004, Mulrooney delivered a keynote speech in Washington, D.C., celebrating the 10th anniversary of the North American Free Trade Agreement. In June 2004, former U.S. President Ronald Reagan died, and Mulrooney presented a eulogy in honor of him. In February 2005, as part of a physical examination, a CT scan revealed 2 small lumps in one of Mulrooney's lungs. Mulrooney had been a heavy smoker until 1983. His doctors performed a biopsy which ruled out cancer. He recovered well enough to tape a speech for the Conservative Party of Canada's 2005 policy convention in Montreal in March. He later developed a pancreatitis, and he remained in hospital for several weeks. In September 2005, veteran writer and former Mulrooney confidant Peter C. Newman released the secret Mulrooney tapes, Unguarded Confessions of a Prime Minister. Newman had been given unfettered access to Mulrooney for a thorough biography and claims Mulrooney did not honor an agreement to allow him access to confidential papers. After the falling out, Mulrooney began to work on his autobiography without Newman's help. He himself has declared that he had showed poor judgment in making such unguarded statements, but he says he will have to live with it. He then uttered a swear word and profanity at the annual Press Gallery dinner in Ottawa in October 2005, directed at Peter Newman. 13 years after leaving office, Mulrooney was named the greenest Prime Minister in Canadian history by a 12-member panel at an event organized by Corporate Knights magazine. He no longer is a member of the Conservative Party of Canada, allegedly because he has been angry at the continued inquiry into his financial affairs. The goods and services tax was to replace the hidden manufacturer sales tax and was created to help eliminate the ever-growing deficit, and especially the Canadian small businesses and many Canadian consumers opposed it, although the successive Liberal governments did nothing to eliminate it. Basically, it was just renamed maybe or something like that, or harmonized with the provincial sales taxes. Even though Mulrooney was a progressive conservative, he was a social liberal. He opposed capital punishment, attempted a compromise on abortion, and he had tolerance for homosexual rights because his brother Gary is a homosexual. And many of these social conservatives drifted from the Progressive Conservative Party into the Reform Party and then later the Canadian Alliance. Military historians Norman Hilmer and J.L. Granatstein ranked Mulroney 8th among Canada's prime ministers in their 1999 book, Prime Ministers Ranking Canada's Leaders. Anyway, Mulroney's prime ministership's later stages marked the upcoming federal demise or weakening of the Progressive Conservatives as the major centre-right political party in Canada, and eventually this led to their 2003 merger with the Canadian Alliance, which was clearly more right-wing and populist in character, to form the new Conservative Party of Canada, although the Conservative Party of Canada has basically a socially liberal leadership, including its current federal leader, Andrew Scheer, who has promised not to reopen the abortion debate and apparently will do as potential future prime minister nothing to restore marriage's traditional definition as the union of one man and one woman, let alone make divorce more difficult to obtain. In September 2007, his memoirs 1939 to 1993 was released. Mulroney in that book criticized Trudeau for avoiding military service in the Second World War, despite the fact that he never served in the army himself, and referenced sources that described the young Trudeau as holding anti-Semitic nationalist views and having an admiration for fascist dictators. He also indirectly criticized Joe Clark first for allowing the 1979 non-confidence vote to go ahead instead of strategically compromising on his budget, and then calling a leadership review in 1983 despite being supported by 2/3 of the Progressive Conservative Convention delegates. And he also included a number of swear words in that biography.